Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We start off today with the decision that has been made to decommission our current DORY Lunar Shuttle that is currently docked to Kauai Potato Station after having nudged one of our Mars payloads to get its solar panels into the sun. We're going to fly an SKS up there because we get paid a lot of money to do that sort of thing, and bring old Dory down and bring up a replacement should we ever actually kick off our lunar program, which, wink wink, hint hint. So the first, I don't know, 3 hours of this live stream recap were spent deciding on what color to paint our replacement Dory, and going with our current theme of Nemo and Dory, we went for a green and named it Crush, which will only be a little bit confusing. Don't worry, it's not this iridescent Ninja Turtles green. It ends up being the much more subdued kind of military Soyuz green, which I'm sure I will find somewhere in this menu at some point, somehow. I mean, the gold foil doesn't look bad, does it? But yeah, as soon as I figured out where it was, the rest of the transitions went a lot smoother. So this will be our third lunar shuttle to be commissioned. Nemo, the original with orange, and originally only had 2 engines, so we actually brought Nemo down once for repair and retrofit before. So we know our SKS Heavy here is very capable of the job. It's just a matter of there being a bunch of pilot error involved sometimes. So we switched the flag out to Wookieed because Wookieed has made both the design for the Lunar Shuttle and the SKS is his touch-up design. Again, thank you, Wookie. And we'll go ahead and get that onto the build queue. And while we are waiting for that to build, we had a maneuver node out at Jupiter for our Jasper 4.5.2 mission. This is supposed to be our sample return from Jupiter. The main body of the craft kind of captured into a Jupiter orbit. It did hit some Jupiter atmosphere on the way in and get a little science there, but it did have to turn and burn to put itself into orbit. And it has 2 atmospheric drop probes, lovingly referred to as hamsters. And its predecessor mission, both hamsters failed before they could radio in anything of any real value. That mission was also in a retrograde orbit around Jupiter, which didn't make it much good to us. This one is in a correct orbit, a good inclination, highly eccentric, so it should make its ejection, should we decide to get it back to Earth, all that much easier. Of course, it does require some coordination between the mothership craft and these little drop probes as they are screaming through Jupiter's upper atmosphere in hopes of being able to radio in anything worthwhile before they meet their inevitable demise due to heat and pressure. The previous iterations did not go so well, although I think it has a lot to do with the extreme eccentricity of this orbit and how much speed they are carrying with them into the Jovian atmosphere, which means we just don't have a whole lot of time to get that atmospheric data or that flying at stuff off the craft. So our timing for those radio in commands has to be kind of on point, which is something I've just never ever been good at, and it's kind of a remote tech limitation. But with our first atmospheric probe deployed, we're going to get the mothership into a higher orbit so that it does not touch the atmosphere anymore, which is just a quick touch up on the RCS from this rather extreme altitude. And later on, as we're coming in, we're going to try to synchronize our time to our Perry-Jove. I hope that's right. It's probably not. I've only been told like 1,000 times. and then hopefully we'll be able to get some pretty good radio ins. This is just me kind of gently plotting out what it would take to get this mothership to burn back to Earth, and the Delta V requirement is not that bad, all things considered. However, it doesn't really get us close to Earth, so I think the timing is just a bit off, and Mech Jeb really does not like it when your orbit is so incredibly eccentric. It likes you to be circular before it does these things, and oh buddy, we are not going to spend 10 kilometers per second of Delta V to try to make this thing not eccentric before just ejecting it right back on out. So we will set an alarm for that maneuver node in hopes that maybe we can touch it up by adjusting our inclination and try to bring some of these nice things home. It would be kind of neat to see if a return from Jupiter is even in the realm of plausible, but all of that will be done much, much later. So it is time to launch our SKS Heavy with our mostly veteran crew. I think everyone on here has been on at least one flight. At the stick today is Lewis Carr. He is a veteran of the BPR and a mission to Mars. He's not been down to the planet, but he did fly a spacecraft out there and successfully get it docked with Harmonia Station. He also did the test run of the BPR lifter and the Chestnut crude module around the moon before we ever sent one off. We also have Alan Elliott and Victoria Bell along for the ride, mostly. I don't think we'll need an engineer or a scientist on this run, but the contract stipulates that we have to have 3 Kerbals in low Earth orbit for like 9 days. So they're going to hang out, they're going to play some video games or read books to kids on live streams, something like that. And speaking of which, I forgot to download the footage locally when I did this live stream, so I do greatly apologize for the lack of game sound during all this sped up footage, but for at least 2 weeks in a row, I've forgotten to record locally. So, sorry. I'll do better, I promise. I've been quite distracted these past couple of weeks working on something else, but we'll talk to that later. There is a beautiful booster separation. They are down and clear. We are going to perform our roll maneuver and eventually just get ourselves dialed in. Yeah, SKS is fighting with me just a little bit. It's just the nature of the beast. At this point, we could probably, I have been told, use atmospheric autopilot to stabilize some of this, since SAS is just kind of bad at it sometimes, but we are also trying to adjust down our relative inclination with Kauai Potato Station, so that we have any hopes of making a rendezvous. It's going to be contained within that relative inclination number, so at least we've got a pretty solid goal on that going, although our current remaining runtime and our time to apoapsis is not very agreeable. So we are, once again, going to end up tail standing this shuttle as we climb our way to orbit. We're going to go ahead and just let that apogee climb all to hell. Our target orbit, of course, is about a 250 by 250. We're going to go way, way, way above that, which is fine because we'll need that difference in our orbital period to make a solid docking or to make a good rendezvous. We don't want to dock with that much. Whoa, boy, yeah, that would be bad. But no. We need a difference in our orbit so that we can try to line up our orbital period times to make rendezvous, and then we'll slow down and make them match before we go for docking, because anything else would be horribly, horribly tragic. So prolonged tail stand on this one, because I did kind of screw up the gravity turn. Gravity turn is the word I'm looking for, but now that we've built up a runtime to our apogee of about 40 seconds. We still got 2 minutes of runtime. I don't think we're going to need all of it. We can just slide a little above 10 degrees above horizon. And again, because of that 10 degree offset on the engines, pointing at 10 degrees above horizons when belly is down is actually putting all of your thrust straight down the horizon. The joys of offset center of mass and center of thrust. And now we'll start angling it way, way down, way, way, way down, because we don't need nearly that much. With 1.2 kilometers left in the tank, we will turn off the main engines and separate the EFT and realize that we are now no longer technically orbital. But I guess that's okay. Let that EFT burn up in the atmosphere. That's kind of the goal anyway, right? Realism. So a quick light from our OMS AJ10 engines, and we are at 712 by 140.3, which is technically in orbit. And now we can set our target for Kauai Potato Station and start to try to make some nodes to get ourselves into a rendezvous. It'll take just a couple of quick orbits or so before we get to a good place where we can make that happen. But first, we're going to adjust our orbit just a little bit. Not really going to try to walk that down too much. We just want to adjust our periapsis up to something that's a little closer to where our station is orbiting. And that should make all of this a whole lot more manageable. So we'll get our solar panels into the sun, and then we'll take a couple of quick orbits, 2 to be exact, before we see that, hey, that's pretty close. That's really, really close. They're not going to spend too much time on orbit at all before we can just go ahead and try to push ourselves in for this rendezvous, which is better than most of my attempts. So we'll start trying to dial in a node for rendezvous. Of course, KSP never really likes to cooperate, and I find really it's better to just kind of get a node that's a suggestion and then rely on Mech Jeb at the closest, or distance at closest approach to kind of dial in the rest of the rendezvous. So this is pretty standard. There's a quick light of the OMS engines, and now we are just watching that distance at closest approach dial way down. We are sub 100 kilometers when we terminate that burn, and then we'll just start to set up another dial it in maneuver. We're probably going to make like 2 or 3 of these as we set up this approach. Sorry, I just lost all of my words. Yeah, so we're just going to set up another maneuver node about a quarter orbit away as we dial in this. Of course, KSP is telling us that there's no way whatsoever that we can get a rendezvous on this, and we will just recklessly fire our OMS engines, kill the node when we've burned way past it. We're going to try to get ourselves at least on some kind of axis here, just to make all the thruster firings that are very likely to follow this maneuver a little bit more predictable. And now that I think that we've dialed in most of that, we're just going to go ahead and try to angle this a little radial in, or I'm sorry, a little normal, and try that. Nope, that doesn't give us the result we want, so we'll try radial out. That is doing the exact opposite of what it says it should be doing. But we also have thrusters firing in the bay that should not be firing and are definitely throwing us off a little bit as far as our axis controls are concerned. So we're going to disable crossfeed. All the fuel tanks in the CrushCraft there should be locked, so they should not be affecting us in any way whatsoever. So we actually do have an axis that works now. We're going to plot a node because we still got 67 some odd kilometers to burn off of this rendezvous maneuvers, multiple. I'll say usually they shouldn't take quite so many little touch-ups, but I guess our orbital periods are not exactly that great, and KSP can't decide if we are going to be 2 kilometers away, 1,000 kilometers away, or 100 kilometers away, because, I don't know, numbers in time, something like that. So we're just going to try just little taps on most of our axes. Again, using the maneuver nodes is great for setting up a suggestion, but the older KSP save gets, the worse and worse and worse it becomes at dealing with these things. But there is a solid burn, getting our closest approach down to about 3 kilometers. We're going to touch the rest of this up on RCS, which it does look like it dials in pretty well. Now that we've got a handle on which way to point, the rest of it becomes pretty easy. There's sub 1 kilometer, so we are going to be making rendezvous. We're just going to try to dial this in as close as we can to eliminate as much as that run-up time to the station as we can. 73 meters looks pretty good to me, so we'll set up our node for match velocities, and then take a very quick jaunt around the planet while I had to step away from the keyboard for just a few minutes, so I hope you enjoy the view. I wish I had moved my mouse pointer just a little bit, or angled the camera slightly differently. But for as much trouble as this game gives me sometimes, it always makes up for it with stuff like that. Sometimes it just looks too dang good. Anyway, so I am back at the controls now, and we are about 9 minutes from our rendezvous. 233 meters per second needed to make our match velocities. We definitely have that. We have some reserve fuel up in the cockpit that normally stays locked because that is our get home free fuel. We will be using just a little bit of that, but it shouldn't be a problem if we are able to dock with the station. Of course, knowing me, a minute and 31 burn will happen about 25 seconds too late, leading us to probably just go screaming past the station. It amazes me that we have to start this burn nearly 10 kilometers away to make up that much difference, while also laying on the thrusters. And somebody here forgot to unlock the reserve fuel. We are instead going to take some of it from Crush, which came up fully fueled. But the engines, I don't know if they wouldn't light, or if I was just really late on hitting the trigger. Oh yeah, no, they won't light because it thinks that we are out of fuel, because it's a glitch within either Real Fuels or KSP itself. If you run out of fuel while the engines are running, then unlock fuel and try to start the engines again, they will be convinced that you are still out of fuel. But a quick F5, F9 will sort that problem right out. We'll just transfer over a bunch more fuel from our payload, because we overshot our target by quite a bit. So now that we've kind of corrected for that, we are going to have to spin back around. A 12 meter per second gap is going to be a bit too much to handle on just OMS, but about halfway through that, we'll try to angle ourselves a little better to reduce that separation at closest approach. Again, approach time is, we want to keep that as low as possible, because, well, when you use physics warp, things like this happen, and if you use actual time warp, the displacement becomes permanent. So, yeah. And there was me thinking 2x time warp was single x, overshooting it by just a little bit. But, hey, look at that. We are mostly rendezvoused and deploying our landing gear for whatever reason. Now we're just going to try to get ourselves dialed in a little bit. We only have one docking port that we can align with. It is that docking adapter, kind of faintly glowing red, sticking off what is now, I guess, our relative top of the station. I will be selecting it as target soon, and fair warning, I'm just plain old really bad at docking with that thing. Yes, I am bad at docking in general. This is a very fair assessment, but when you're moving, close to 90 tons around, trying to dock it with something else, one, it takes a lot of thruster fuel. Two, your angles matter a lot more, because the magnets on the docking clamps don't compensate for nearly as much as your difference in angle as they do on lighter spacecraft. So unless your approach is just dead on perfect, you're not going to get it docking. So, and I would say Lewis Carr here should be an absolute expert at docking heavy things in orbit, having docked the 230 plus some odd ton Chestnut spacecraft to Harmonia Station in Mars orbit. This should have been, like right up his alley, or something similar, I guess. But we are going to try to move this in single axis at a time, which is really just the best way to kind of go about it. So we'll just get ourselves over the target and then pivot our nose in, and hopefully just magically find ourselves lined up with the target. Yeah, guess what happens? So here's our first initial break on our single axis alignment. Braking, 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 too much. We're actually traveling on more than one axis at a time, and at least knowing which way is for what control is typically easy, although pitch apparently is going to do me in today. So there's our swing to bring our nose into alignment, or at least pointing in somewhat the correct direction, and then we're going to try to roll to bring our cargo bay facing our new payload as easily as possible, because, well, it would just be nice. And then we'll assume that that is kind of lined up and make our approach. Yeah, no, not lined up, not lined up at all. Our angle is just wrong. Our approach is just wrong. Many things about this are just wrong. I will try to compensate for it now. Remember, this is sped up the 4x footage, although since we're yellow clocked, it might actually be functioning in real time. Yeah, there's some paint and enough to nudge Kawaii Potato Station onto a slight off-axis roll, and I really thought that one right there would have had it, but it turned out no. Definitely not. So a little bit of physics bump. This is why I fear using persistent rotation, by the way, is because stuff like that would just be absolutely unrecoverable. We'd have to have a pretty potent thruster setup on the station itself if we were to terminate any induced spin, especially a multi-axis spin like this where your docking ports are at one extremity and pushing down on it, acting like a lever to pivot things. So I guess with DP or with ooh buddy, with persistent rotation, maybe it would be best to have your docking hub assemblies be someplace close to the center of mass of your station target. So that way, if you nudge it, you only push it on one axis instead of 2 or 3, which man, yeah, that would be just terrifying. So here is yet another approach where, once again, I thought I had a pretty good alignment. I guess that's kind of spoilers. Chat being very angry at me for not using a certain mod, which shall go unnamed. Just a very gentle angle in, but yeah, noticing again, our angle is off. Although it looks from that angle pretty good. If we can just correct, and then, yeah, no, don't have it lined up in time. We're too low, and the station is spinning again. So had that spin not been a thing, we probably would have been lined up for that second tap approach, but now you can see, yeah, it is once again being nudged, and there's just another little nudge. No big deal. Just trading paint between friends. A skill that proved very useful when you have to nudge a payload so its solar panels can be in the sun. Absolutely not useful while trying to dock very heavy things with very off-axis docking ports in low Earth orbit under a time crunch. So, you know, it's a thing. Eventually, the decision was properly made to just not go through with the docking at all, and instead have our pilot bring over the new payload. It has life support, it has fuel. We don't really need to dock this big clunky shuttle to our fragile, weather-beaten space station. We just need to dock the payload, grab the old DORY, and bring it into the cargo bay and do a docking and do that docking, which will be easier because it's, you know, enclosed on 3 sides, and there's no way that DORY's gonna nudge the space shuttle into a big spin like our station is currently doing. Although we will have to back the shuttle off and get it clear before it starts tearing holes and things with that big shielded docking port at the nose, just to make sure we're not screwing up everything else while we try to get all of these things set up and aligned. So we don't want it drifting too far, just as that would be, well, rather inconvenient. So here is the CrushCraft making its alignment approach and looking pretty good while doing it. I think I took a screenshot. Maybe I'll remember to put it as a thumbnail this time. At least I remembered to do it. Points for that, for actually remembering to do something this time. And these lunar shuttles are much, much easier to dock. In fact, they were designed in such a way to make them easy to dock with a good weight balance and all the necessary care and instruction that is needed to make them, I guess, align well and be rather balanced along the thrusters. I don't know why he hopped out and then got back in. I've completely forgotten. Many, many apologies. Also, these craft are lighter than the station itself, so they have much less of a chance of throwing everything all cattywampus should their alignment be not good. Although it does look like the station is kind of spinning slowly, although I thought we hit the time warp thing to kind of stop that. I guess not. But here is a rather terrible docking approach that we're going to try to correct for last minute by hitting the brakes, pivoting in, hitting the brakes again right before we nudge anything at all, and then adjusting ourselves to line up with the docking port, which again, having quality thruster authority makes docking so much easier when you can just tap a direction and then, oh, hey, you're moving. Look at that. Look at the ease at which this thing swims around and gets itself almost set up. Yeah, a little bit of pivot there because I did not take the time to balance the fuel. We have an empty tank at the back, which is throwing off our balance by just a bit and making my life a little more difficult than these things are typically to fly. Usually when we're bringing one of these back from the moon, we just center all the remaining fuel in the centered tanks, and that keeps the weight balance pretty even. Really, the only time the pontoons are filled is when it's making ejection from the moon to Earth or from Earth to the moon, more notably. And those are the first tanks to go, and really the only ones that throw off our balance. There's a little trade and paint. There's a little garbage collection. A little more wiggles. The magnets are finally starting to do something eventually. God, worst docking ever. I'm usually not even this terrible at it. This is really bad. So of course this happens on a live stream. There, finally docked. Finally we have payload delivered, and the chat does celebrate. Thank goodness, because really that was getting really annoying. Every part of this is getting really annoying, and if we have any hope of this thing fitting in the cargo bay, we're going to need to move these crates off of DORY and onto one of the cargo hooks on the CrushCraft. So that is our first order of business, is to make sure that we can get these crates somewhere. Of course, drifted too far to get that one attached in time. Make a second run. Boom, there it is. Knock your helmet into the rack. Good job. And then go board the DORY. Do a quick slide off the ladder to make sure you look cool in front of all your friends. One more time, because ladders, gripping things, not covered in part of the training, I guess. So we'll just make sure that it's got some life support on hand. I did think about moving over some fuel because we want this thing to be empty for its deorbit. I think the empty mass of this is almost full capacity for what this thing will deorbit, although I really think the lab modules that we deorbited from Polar a while back were much, much heavier. They were also much, much bigger and spanned the entire cargo bay, and thus gave us a much more even weight distribution across the frame, whereas DORY here just kind of sits in the bottom 3/4 or so and does not have very good weight. It does offset our tonnage to the butt by quite a bit, so it is something that we do need to to be aware of, because it's going to make any landing, even if it is a dirt landing, a little more complicated. We're going to have to come in a little faster, at least vertical speed across the ground, or horizontal speed across the ground, I'm sorry. It's going to have to be a little higher than what we would do with an empty spacecraft. So Lewis Carr is getting this rolled at least to have one axis correct on approach, and hopefully this docking will go pretty smoothly, because we're surrounded on 3 sides by Space Shuttle cargo bay, which we really shouldn't be nudging into, but oh yeah, we're totally gonna because it will help us get our alignment almost right. It's just you can't quite go as deep as you would. It really is just right in the middle. And once again, I did not take the time to balance the fuel load of the Aerozine N2O that is inside the station, or inside the DORY, I'm sorry. And there was a quick check on our tonnage. This vessel currently weighs 37 tons. I'd say that's more than double, I guess, what our rated return capacity is, which I've been told by the manufacturer is about 10 tons, although I think we've brought at least 15 home the last time we brought back Nemo for his engine retrofit. Although, again, I think the Science Lab module was heavier, but it was also spanning the entire cargo bay and not just the rear 2/3. So we will switch control now to our rear docking port. And then as soon as I adapt myself to the controls, we're going to try really hard not to nudge the panels. And again, this is in 4 times time warp. But with a yellow clock, it really comes down to being more like actual speed, which, except for the camera changes, it feels more natural that way. Anyway, we came in too low that first time. We're going to try to adjust it in. There should be a little more roll on this, but you know what? Beggars can't be choosers, and I was so sick of doing dockings at this point that I was really not about to take the time to do it right. So, boom. Docked. We're in there. Everyone is safe and alive. The payload is secured. Lewis Carr is going to EVA back into the cockpit and then hopefully grab the ladder successfully. Good job. Total vehicle mass now up to 93 tons. I guess we were a bit lighter than I assumed we were. We are going to touch up as much of our fuel into our main tanks as we can, although we will be jettisoning a lot of this to do our deorbit. But we have about 9 days to clear before we can do that, as terms of our contract stipulate the crew needs to stay in orbit for 9 days in order for us to get paid. But we can fold away that docking port. We're totally not going to need it, and now they can sit back, relax. The business is done. And we just have to stay in orbit for 9 days, which, of course, the countdown timer not running seems to happen a lot. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it. And I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.